Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way next, Off 90. A look at the Cold War from a local point of view. Still milking after all these years. From library to gallery. And chalk art. It's all coming up on your next stop, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this trip, Off 90. There's a sign just outside of St. Bonifacius on Highway 7 that indicates the town was home to a former missile base during the Cold War. We decided to check that out, which led to a greater understanding of Minnesota's place in the Cold War.
Let us face, without panic, the reality of our times. The fact that atom bombs may someday be dropped on our cities.
I had gotten interested in some of the Cold War infrastructure that was in the Twin Cities, and I was interested in what parts were still around and what parts were still visible. And the Nike missile sites came up over the course of my research, and I thought it'd be a good subject for a column. So we are in St. Bonnie, and we are near Missile Park, which is where there is a marker to the Nike missile base that had been located very near here during the earliest parts of the Cold War. In the early days of the Cold War, if a nuclear war was to break out between the Soviet Union and the United States, nuclear weapons would have to be delivered the old-fashioned way. You'd have to get them in a plane and fly them over the North Pole and actually fly over the cities that you were going to bomb. When the defense schemes were being put together in the 1950s, one of the earliest missile defense plans was to actually place these Nike missile bases on the perimeter of major American cities so that if the Soviet bombers got over the North Pole and they hadn't been shot down over that or over Canada, the last resort was you would have to have these missiles come out of the ground and shoot the planes down very close to their final targets.
Handle yourself right and you've got a good chance of coming through. Do the wrong things and you've got a future like an ice cube in a hot toddy.
During the early part of the 1950s, this was a period when the U.S. government was telling everybody that it's possible to survive a nuclear war.
Learn and live.
If we got word ahead of time, we could protect ourselves. But in order to get that word, to know that the Soviets were coming for us, we had to have a system in place. One of those systems was a pretty extensive radar system across the United States, but there were holes in it. So there needed to be sort of a backup. What they created were the Ground Observer Corps, which are basically civilian volunteers who would go up, usually on the roofs of buildings, into bell towers, wherever, with their binoculars and just scan the skies, looking for Soviet aircraft on their way to their targets. It appeared to me that Minnesota was probably at the top, or at the very least, near the top of the per capita volunteering that was done for the GOC, the Ground Observer Corps.
With the knowledge of the first atomic explosions to guide us, our chances for survival will be far better than those of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Many school districts across the country developed preparedness pamphlets and guidelines for what to do in the event of an emergency, and the emergency was the possibility of an atomic attack. And that was true here too in Minnesota, where a manual was developed to train children and their families what children should do to protect themselves.
Yes, the knowledge is ours. and preparation can mean survival for you.
Starting about 1953, after the Soviet hydrogen bomb test, the new emphasis was evacuating the cities. And to get ready for that, the U.S. government started scheduling these annual test runs, basically, where they would act as if the Soviets were attacking us. The fact of the matter was, even if we're able to evacuate thousands of people out of the Twin Cities metro area, there's still going to be thousands more who aren't going to make it.
The Soviet missile development program reveals that it introduces a new dimension to surprise and forces us to reassess our own strategic position and re-evaluate the Soviets' ability to deal a crippling blow.
In 1957, the Soviets tested the first intercontinental ballistic missile. So now we know the Soviets have this technology that theoretically you put a bomb on top of one of these missiles. It can get to the United States, it can get to Minnesota in a matter of minutes, instead of taking several hours for a bomber to get from the Soviet Union to wherever it was going. And so the government started concentrating instead on creating what they called fallout shelters.
The shelter markings on the buildings in our cities and towns are symbols of an ever-expanding civil defense effort.
So more and more Americans just started rejecting this idea that civil defense has any real role to play in keeping ourselves safe. And what happened was, in Minnesota and other states, the civil defense agencies sort of converted to think about natural disasters instead of these man-made, let's throw bombs at each other disasters.
You know, if you see a blast, dive under your table. If you see a blast, it's too late, you know? And that was pretty obvious to everybody. And so civil defense measures were on one level useless and on another level terrifying. So I think their two alleged purposes to protect people and ease fears did exactly the opposite.
The kind of setup like this, where you would have bombers flying over and dropping nuclear weapons and being shot down by missiles, 30 minutes outside the Twin Cities, is certainly a part of the past. The Cold War is over, obviously, but the threat of a nuclear annihilation is not a part of history. That is a part of the present that we live in. And so I think anything that reminds people that, hey, this isn't just history, this is something that is still going on in some form, is an important thing for people to keep in mind.
Rockdale Creamery was built in 1889, well over 100 years ago. The creamery is the oldest cooperative creamery operating in Minnesota. There have been many changes over the years, and its membership has dwindled to a fraction of what it once was. But Rockdale Creamery continues to endure. We talked with Phil Cease, a member of Rockdale Creamery, about its longevity.
I've been milking cows for just about 60 years. Farming is a very, very, very interesting way of life, to put it mildly. The ups and downs are tough, but there's a lot of personal satisfaction in what you do. Well, I'm Phil Cease. I'm a dairy farmer from southeastern Minnesota. On our farm, myself, my wife Deb of 47 years, my grandson Zach, and my 2 granddaughters, Mackenzie and Kayla. I'm 68 years old. I've done this ever since I was 6 years old. My dad was crippled, and my brother and I had to milk the cows when we were just little guys, and we've done it our whole lifetime. So I don't know where the energy comes from. I just like what I do. I like to work. Well, my day starts, I wake up, I get out of bed at 4:30 in the morning, 7 days a week. Try and be in the dairy barn at 5 o'clock in the morning, assess everything, feed the cows, try and have the milkers on by 5:30. Hopefully done milking and everything by 7:30. Feed the baby calves, go out and feed the bigger cattle. Put silage in the bunk and turn the cows out hopefully by 8:30, and then clean the barns, bed the barns, put feed back down for the cows, and go up for breakfast. Hopefully I'm in by 10 o'clock for breakfast.
How many cattle do you milk?
I got 60 milk cows. Every cow has its own unique personality. One will switch a tail, one will stomp, one will be calm, one turns around while you're milking and licks you and loves you, and yeah, they've all got their own personality. When you work with a set of cows, as long as I have, you become very in-depth at how they feel, how they act. Pretty much, did my cows stand in the same stall every day, and did they not eat, and why? So, they're down on milk right now, what's the problem? So then you diagnose that cow. Every animal gets a little different feed. Babies get the starter. The next group up gets what we call an 18% TMR. It's got everything in it. They really don't need hay or anything. And then as they graduate into the next pen, they get into the pellets and just the corn feeding with the hay. Our feeding programs are so much more scientific today than they were 40, 50 years ago. 40 years ago, I was happy with 35 pounds per cow per day milk. Today, I'm not happy if they're not over 60. Dad started selling milk here in the early 70s when the Sturtville Co-op Creamery went broke. Rockdale Creamery is a co-op that provides a service to patrons that sell products and buy products here from us. We just had our annual meeting about a month ago, and our 129th year of providing service to our patrons. In 1889, they formed at that time would have been called the Zumbro Co-op Creamery. In 1919, they built the creamery, the current building we're in now. This safe was delivered to the Rockdale Creamery in 1903, and I've still got the combination for it and everything. Inside it is old shares that you would buy and give to the people as they come and they became patrons, and they could buy stock. And this is your preferred stock paper here. It gets really interesting to look through some of this. Copies of the original bylaws of the Rockdale Creamery. At the time they formed these, say back in the 30s and 40s, we had 400 and 500 patrons. And the co-op became one voice for all of the patrons. We've got 9 patrons left. Rockdale is about 18 miles southwest of Rochester, Minnesota. Well, every little town had a creamery because milk was delivered to these, or the cream was actually delivered to these dairies on wagons and carts and behind horse-drawn things because we did not have the transportation, roads or otherwise, back in the 1800s and early 1900s. Originally, these creameries did not buy milk. They only bought cream. That's why you see all the old separators, because farmers years and years ago, and that's back even before my time, and milk was separated at home with these cream separators. Cream was sold to the dairies to make the butters and the cheeses, and the skim milk was fed to the pigs. Every butter maker has a different recipe. Some will be milder, some will be softer, some will be saltier. And yeah, so yeah, there's a different taste. There's a different taste. Years ago, there was a different taste in the spring when the cows went out on grass. And then in the fall, when they came back into just hays and silages, it changed the taste a little bit that way too. In the latter years, when the butter quit, we marketed our milk. Fredericksburg, Iowa bought our milk at Meinert's Creameries for many years, and it just evolved into where we are today. Right now, the milk is delivered directly to AMPI. Associated Milk Producers Incorporated, they buy milk, produce cheeses and for retail sales. 30 years ago, when we had milk trucks picking up our milk, you would leave a slip on the bulk tank with what you wanted them. The next pickup, they'd bring your butter, your ice cream, patron supplies. Today, we do not have private milk trucks that pick up. We've got contract haulers. So we've got all of the products that the dairy farmers and surrounding farmers need to come in and take care of their business on the farm. I mean, we've got a variety of products for even the general public to come in and buy. We're open from 10 to 3 and 9 to noon on Saturday. Every Saturday morning I open at 9, and by 9:10 I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 farmers come in and sit here and drink coffee and solve the world problems till next week. So it's really unique. And we got a lot of people that don't want us to ever close this place because of that. I love what I do. Simple as that.
Around the turn of the 20th century, millionaire businessman Andrew Carnegie granted money to communities all over the world to build libraries, which were called, appropriately enough, Carnegie Libraries. One such community was Mankato. In 1981, the Mankato Carnegie Library became the Carnegie Art Center, which showcases the contemporary culture of southern Minnesota.
The variety of artists that enter or exhibit in the Carnegie or the spaces around there is not one type. That's what's so cool about like the membership shows or the juried shows is you have everything from sculpture to photography to painting, and I don't think you could narrow it down to a smaller group. It's just so varied.
I'm Hope Cook, and I am a volunteer at the Carnegie Art Center in Mankato, Minnesota. The history of this Carnegie Library in Mankato's Carnegie goes back to 1901. It was granted in 1901 from Andrew Carnegie for $40,000. 1902, 1903, when the building opened, it was Mankato's public library until 1976. After the library moved from here, this became city offices. So the Arts Council had a small gallery in the lower level. And when this building came up for sale in '79, that group of artists petitioned the city of Mankato to purchase this building. And in '81, purchased the building from the city of Mankato for $1. And I think a lot of people thought the group of artists couldn't pull it off. We're pretty much known as the largest exhibition space, I think, in southern Minnesota. And our mission is to represent only southern Minnesota regional artists.
I am John Connect. I'm a local artist and live on a farm just south of Mapleton. So when I moved to Mankato, after I graduated, we moved to Mankato. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment. I was looking for a space where I could paint without filling the apartment with oil fumes, and the Carnegie offered them, and very, very reasonable. I've never left.
The people that enter their work come from, we have college professors. We have retired college professors. We have students from this year, Gustavus and Mankato State or Minnesota State. We have people who have never entered a show. So it ranges from student work, so they're going to be artists in their 20s, to artists in their 80s right now.
I think the artistic community in Mankato is special because it's so varied, and there's just a lot of people. I'm impressed every year with like the juried show or the membership show or the other galleries like the 410 and MSU and their plays. I mean, they're incredible. They do an incredible job with their play department and the artists they turn out of there.
We've been doing our juried show since 2012. So this year, 2019 juried exhibition, 228 works were entered, and the juror Roger Boulay from Winona State juried it down to 100 pieces. But they represent 75 individual artists.
There's so many great artists in this area that, and you're having one person. It's very subjective, so I don't get crushed if my piece doesn't win, but it's always nice to have someone pick your piece for a juried show instead of just entering a show and getting in. So I just thought, I like my photos. I'm not versed in the academics of photography besides the very basics, but I shoot what I like. So I thought I will pick a couple photos that I like, and I'll frame them and mat them and take it from there. And the two pieces that were in this last show were framed with the wood that was from the barn. They were rafters from the lean-to part of the barn, so I thought that'd be kind of cool to have part of the barn framing the picture of the barn.
A lot of visual artists in the region are always working in isolation. And if they're not a student, in an academic environment, or they haven't been doing a lot of, a long career of making images, it's a kind of a feedback too. But I think it's just one of those things that artists do in terms of getting the work out into the public, rather than keeping it, in the closed doors in the studio. It's always evolving, and I think it's sort of exciting every month when we close down to install and then it opens again to see what's happening.
Amy Dybing is an artist who creates with a unique medium, chalk. In the past few years, Amy has turned her skills into a profession where she creates attractive chalk messages for businesses. We caught up with Amy at Forager Brewery in Rochester.
Hi, I'm Amy Dybing. We're at Forager Brewing Company, and I'm the chalkboard artist here, and I'm going to do some chalk art for the band tonight. My goal when I do chalkboard art for a band is that it's something they're going to love when they walk in the door, and they get to kind of get amped up about like playing here, I guess, and hopefully when they come back, they want another board by me. I'm actually looking at a past chalkboard that I did. So I'm drawing the head of a guitar, and I'm drawing, I don't know what these things are called on the sides of the guitar, but it's for like tuning it. I don't play instruments, so I don't really know. I've just drawn them. I'm just kind of doing the outline right now. It looks nice when you get a nice chalkboard and you can put anything you want on there. Like I just did an Oktoberfest. I'll do menus, different stuff like that. Weddings, I'm doing a wedding this weekend. Band boards usually take me an hour to 45 minutes every morning. I come in early. I like to do it when nobody's here. I get in my own zone. I can play music, whatever I want. But I also do all of the chalkboards here, so I will do the beer chalkboards on the beer board. I guess that kind of makes me nervous too, being up on a ladder in front of a bunch of people, but I like to play with different fonts. I'm a server here as well, yeah. So when I get done doing this, I just start my shift, start serving. I have no experience with any art or graphics classes. My mom's an artist, so I guess it just kind of runs in my family to be creative and artistic.
We're near the end of this tour off 90. Thanks for riding along. See you next time. But before we go, here's something else.
Hi, I'm Casey Pearson, and I'm a professional makeup artist and hairstylist from Minnesota. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Minnesota with a focus in painting and drawing. I'm now a full-time freelancer working in film, commercial, TV, and print, and I get to make a living creating art. One of the most exciting projects I've worked on is a feature film called Over There. It's a World War I film and was shot entirely in Minnesota except for one day. We had an incredibly talented cast and crew, most of them local, as well as Hollywood actors Billy Zane and Ron Perlman. I get to work with amazing creative people and love being able to transform someone into the character they're playing or give them the confidence to do a photo shoot. Making a living as a freelance hair and makeup artist takes perseverance, the drive to always be learning and improving, and the strength to stand up for your craft. I'm so grateful to be able to do what I love, and so thankful to Minnesota for having such a wonderful community for people in the creative arts.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.